Manihari, a secluded village in eastern India, nestled by the swirling Ganges River, was steeped in unease. Its narrow lanes, lined with clay-walled homes, had grown unnaturally quiet. A single thread of terror wound its way through whispered rumors. A Pishacha, a demon from ancient lore, had claimed the night as its hunting ground. The villagers avoided the dark, their clay lamps casting weak, flickering defenses against the unseen menace. Livestock vanished without a trace, and people spoke of spectral laughter riding on the wind. When the Sarpanch's, village head's, daughter disappeared, leaving only clawed tracks and a blood-stained ribbon by the river, the elders called for help beyond their own. Thus, I arrived. The night air carried a sour edge, heavy with unspoken fears. My leather boots disturbed the dusty path as I entered the village, my revolver and protective talismans hidden beneath a battered trench coat. I had dealt with the unnatural before, skinwalkers, wendigos, and ancient curses, but every land carried its own darkness. The Pishacha was a creature of Indian mythology, a malevolent entity born of human sins, capable of possession and destruction. As the villagers crowded around me, their faces hollow with desperation, the story began to unfold. And in the whispers, I detected the first threads of a pattern, a tragedy that reeked not just of death, but guilt. "Who among you has seen the demon?" I asked, my voice cutting through their murmurs. One trembling hand rose, a boy of no more than 12. His eyes bore a shadow that no child should know. "It comes at night," he said. "It has red eyes, and its teeth are like a crocodile's." His voice cracked. "It calls to us by name." The boy's account led me to the heart of the village, where an ancient banyan tree stretched its limbs across the heavens like skeletal fingers. It was a natural centerpiece, but tonight, its gnarled roots seemed like the twisted veins of some subterranean beast. A garland of marigolds lay shriveled at its base, once an offering to placate the gods, now a rotting relic of failed prayers. "This tree," the Sarpanch said, his voice quaking, "is cursed. The Pishacha has marked it." I knelt by the roots and ran my hand across the soil. It was damp, sticky, and when I raised my fingers to the lantern's light, I saw the unmistakable crimson sheen of blood. A deep growl rumbled, but not from the tree, it emanated from the shadows behind us. "Stay close," I ordered, drawing my revolver. The villagers clustered behind me, clutching one another, their prayers barely audible over the rising wind. The growl morphed into a snarl, and then into something far worse, a cruel laughter, human and yet not. It slithered into the mind, uncoiling fear like a serpent. "Who's there?" I demanded. From the darkness, two glowing red orbs blinked into existence. The villagers screamed, scattering in every direction. Only the Sarpanch and the boy remained rooted, paralyzed by terror. I aimed the revolver, the silver bullets within gleaming faintly under the lantern light. The figure that stepped forward made my blood run cold. It was no longer human, its limbs were unnaturally long, its mouth lined with fangs, and its face contorted into a hideous parody of a grin. Yet I recognized it. It was the Sarpanch's daughter. "Papa," she cooed, her voice syrupy and mocking. "Won't you welcome me home?" The Sarpanch fell to his knees, his tears mixing with the dirt. "What have you done to her?" he wailed. The creature that wore his daughter's face tilted its head. "She is mine now," it said, its voice reverberating with layers, one human, the other guttural, inhuman. "And she will remain mine unless you do something for me." The boy beside me tugged at my coat. "Don't listen," he whispered. "The Pishacha always lies." I tightened my grip on the revolver, but the creature only laughed. "Oh, the foreigner thinks his bullets can harm me. How quaint." It stepped closer, its movements deliberate, like a predator savoring the chase. "But I don't want blood tonight. I want a secret." The Sarpanch raised his head. "A secret?" "Yes," the demon hissed. "One that will break your village apart. Tell me who among you has sinned the most, and I will release your child." The Sarpanch hesitated, his gaze darting between his possessed daughter and the huddled villagers. I stepped between him and the creature. "You'll get nothing from him," I growled. "And I'll send you screaming back to hell." The Pishacha's grin faltered, if only for a moment. "Then you'll never save her," it spat, before vanishing into the shadows. The air grew still, the silence deafening. Back in the Sarpanch's hut, the villagers gathered to deliberate. The child, though missing, was not the only victim. The demon's influence spread far and wide, and its hunger was growing. Who could the Pishacha be hunting? I asked, pacing the room. Why does it linger here? The elders exchanged nervous glances but remained silent. The Sarpanch avoided my gaze altogether. It was clear to me that this village had skeletons buried deeper than the banyan's roots. Before I could press further, the boy tugged at my coat again. "Sir," he whispered, "I saw something last night. Near the river." His words prickled the hairs on my neck. The river, sacred yet dangerous, held its own mysteries. "Show me." The boy led me to the riverbank under the pale glow of a waning moon. The air smelled of silt and decay, and the reeds whispered like voices conspiring in the dark. The Ganges, usually revered as a source of purification, seemed to carry an unholy chill tonight. "There," the boy said, pointing to a cluster of stones piled unevenly near the water's edge. A faint coppery scent wafted from the mound, unmistakable to someone who had walked alongside death as often as I had. I knelt and brushed away the damp earth. The stones gave way to something far worse, a human hand, skeletal and twisted. The rest of the corpse lay beneath, its skull shattered as though bludgeoned with great force. I stood slowly, my mind churning. "Who is this?" I asked the boy. He shrank back, his small frame trembling. "I don't know, sir," he whispered. "But I heard the Pishacha laughing here last night. The pieces were falling into place, but they painted a picture I couldn't yet understand. A murder, carefully hidden, had poisoned this village long before the demon came. And demons, as I knew well, thrived on corruption. Run back to your family," I told the boy. "Tell no one of this yet." His bare feet made no sound as he disappeared into the shadows. I studied the remains again, the twisted positioning of the bones suggesting the body had been hastily buried. The head bore marks of blunt trauma, likely inflicted by someone who'd wanted the victim silenced. "Who were you?" I murmured to the corpse. But the dead, I'd learned, rarely answer kindly. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the distant echo of laughter. The Pishacha was watching. The next morning, I convened the village elders. Word of the discovery had spread, and a crowd gathered around the Sarpanch's hut. Fear and suspicion crackled in the air like a storm waiting to break. Who was buried by the river? I demanded, placing a shard of the broken skull on the table before them. The elders averted their gazes, and the Sarpanch's lips tightened. "We do not know," he said after a long pause. "Lies," I snapped. "That grave is not old, and the corpse was no stranger. Someone here knows exactly what happened, and why the Pishacha is feeding on your guilt." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A wiry man with a scar running from his brow to his jaw finally spoke. "It was Rajan," he said, his voice sharp. "A drunkard and a thief. He disappeared months ago. Good riddance." I studied the man, my instincts prickling. He'd spoken the words with practiced ease, but the quick dart of his eyes betrayed unease. "And how did he meet his end?" I pressed. "We don't know," another elder interjected hastily. "He vanished, as you said." The villagers shifted nervously, their collective silence screaming louder than words. The Pishacha fed on sin, yes, but also on denial. Whatever secrets tied this village to the demon, they were buried deeper than the corpse. That night, as the oil lamps flickered weakly against the encroaching dark, I sat by the banyan tree. Its roots, once merely grotesque, now seemed to writhe faintly in the moonlight, pulsing with an unnatural life. The talisman around my neck, a blessing gifted by an old sadhu I'd once saved, burned against my skin. The first scream pierced the silence just past midnight. I sprinted toward the sound, my revolver drawn. The Sarpanch's home was under siege, shutters rattling violently, doors splintering as unseen claws tore at the wood. Inside, the family huddled, chanting fevered prayers. I burst in, firing a shot into the ceiling. The noise brought silence, and for a moment, I thought the creature had fled. But then I heard it, a deep, guttural growl emanating from the shadows near the hearth. The Pishacha emerged, crawling on all fours. Its form twisted, its mouth splitting into an impossibly wide grin. The Sarpancha's wife screamed, clutching her rosary. "You cannot kill me," it hissed, its voice a blend of growls and mockery. "But you can join me." I fired, the silver bullet striking its shoulder. It howled, its form flickering as though struggling to maintain shape. For a moment it was both the demon and the girl it had possessed. "Papa, help me," the girl's voice cried. I hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. The Pishacha seized the moment, vanishing into smoke. The room fell silent, the only sound the Sarpancha's ragged sobs. The next morning, I inspected the banyan tree. Strange symbols were carved into its bark, jagged and unfamiliar, yet pulsing faintly with malevolence. Villagers whispered of rituals conducted in secret, of sacrifices meant to cleanse sins but corrupted by greed. "The tree is cursed," the Sarpanch said, his voice hollow. "Our ancestors made a pact long ago, and now we pay the price." "What kind of pact?" I asked sharply. He hesitated, but before he could answer, another scream tore through the air. This time, it came from the river. I ran to the riverbank, the villagers trailing behind me like frightened sheep. The morning mist clung thick, twisting the landscape into something unrecognizable. As we reached the water's edge, a collective gasp rose from the crowd. A body floated in the shallows, face down. The Sarpanch pushed forward, his hands trembling as he rolled the corpse onto its back. It was Rajan. Or rather, what was left of him. The corpse's eyes were missing, gouged out cleanly, and its mouth was stretched into an unnatural grin, held in place by some unholy force. Strange markings were etched into the skin, spiraling around his chest and arms like the symbols carved into the banyan tree. "The demon," a villager whispered. "It's making him an example." I crouched by the body, examining the symbols more closely. They weren't random, they were runes, old and potent, designed for binding and summoning. My breath hitched as the realization dawned, someone had called the Pishacha to Manihari. This wasn't the work of a wandering demon. It was a curse born of intent. "Take the body to the temple," I ordered. "Do not burn it yet." The villagers hesitated, reluctant to touch what they believed was tainted. "Now!" I barked, snapping them from their stupor. As they carried Rajan away, I turned my attention to the symbols. There was a pattern here, though its meaning eluded me. The Pishacha wasn't just feeding, it was tethered to something deeper. The village temple, a small shrine dedicated to Kali, had stood for centuries. Its caretaker, an old priest named Mohan, greeted me with wary eyes as the body was laid on the stone altar. "This is an abomination," Mohan said, crossing himself and muttering prayers under his breath. I showed him the symbols etched into Rajan's flesh. "Do you recognize these?" He flinched as though struck. "They are runes of binding. They tie the demon to this world, ensuring it cannot be banished easily." "Who would have the knowledge to carve these?" I pressed. Mohan hesitated. "Many years ago, there was a man, a tantric practitioner, who lived on the village outskirts. He was cast out for dabbling in forbidden rites. His name was Bhishma." I leaned closer. "What happened to him?" The priest's voice dropped to a whisper. "He disappeared, but not before cursing the village. He vowed that one day, his magic would return, and we would all suffer. The villagers were reluctant to speak of Bhishma, but fear loosened lips. Stories emerged of his anger, his experiments with death, and his obsession with controlling the Pishacha, a creature he believed could grant him immortality. Bhishma was insane, the Sarpanch said. He sought power no man should wield. When the elders confronted him, they found his hut filled with bones, human bones. Did anyone witness his death? I asked. No, the Sarpanch admitted. He vanished. But his hut burned to the ground shortly after. I didn't believe in coincidences. If Bhishma had truly been consumed by his own dark ambitions, why were his runes resurfacing now? Someone, or something, was continuing his work. The following night, the Pishacha returned. It struck a farmer's hut on the outskirts of the village. By the time I arrived, the scene was chaos. The roof was torn open, and the farmer's wife was gone. Blood splattered the walls, and claw marks marred the doorframe. The villagers screamed, demanding answers. You said you would protect us, one cried, his face twisted in despair. I am trying, I growled. But this creature feeds on your fear and your secrets. Until you give me the truth, it will keep coming. The Sarpanch stepped forward, his shoulders slumped. Bhishma's hut, he said finally. Perhaps it holds the answers you seek. By torchlight, I ventured to the ruins of Bhishma's hut. The place was a blackened scar on the earth, its walls reduced to ash long ago. But the ground was undisturbed, and as I dug through the debris, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. A box. Its lock was rusted, but a swift strike from my dagger shattered it. Inside were scrolls, yellowed with age, and a small clay idol of the Pishacha. The scrolls were covered in runes similar to those on Rajan's corpse, along with diagrams of rituals designed to bind and command the demon. One line struck me like a thunderclap. To summon the Pishacha, one must offer blood willingly, family blood. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had sacrificed a loved one to bring this creature here. And that meant the Pishacha's master was still among us. I returned to the village, the scrolls clutched tightly in my hand. The demon was summoned, I announced, my voice cutting through the frightened murmurs. Someone among you called it, and fed it blood. The crowd erupted into chaos. Accusations flew like arrows, and fear fractured their unity further. Silence. I roared. This ends now. I will find the one responsible. And when I do, they will face the consequences. The tension in the village reached a fever pitch. Accusations flew like arrows, each villager attempting to deflect suspicion. Yet, as I watched the chaos unfold, I saw the truth etched in their faces, guilt. Not one soul here was free of it. The Sarpanch tried to calm the crowd, but his own fear betrayed him. Enough. I bellowed, silencing the mob. The Pishacha feeds on division. If you cannot band together, you're already doomed. The villagers quieted, though unease still simmered. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Mohan, the temple keeper, standing apart, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Mohan, I called, come here. He hesitated but obeyed. As he approached, I felt the weight of his unease. You know something you haven't told me, I said softly. He wrung his hands. There is an old rite, detective. A way to expose those who harbor dark intentions. What kind of rite? I pressed. It involves fire, he said, his voice trembling. And faith. By nightfall, the villagers had gathered in the temple courtyard, a crackling bonfire at the center. Mohan explained the ritual. Each villager would take a sacred coal from the fire and place it in their hand. The innocent would bear no mark, protected by their purity. But those who had summoned the demon would be burned. The villagers murmured nervously. Superstition was a potent force, but so was fear of exposure. One by one, they approached the fire. Hands trembled as they reached into the flames, yet most emerged unscathed, their palms clean. I observed closely, looking for any flicker of hesitation. When it was the Sarpanch's turn, he faltered. His eyes darted to the crowd, searching for an escape. "I am innocent," he declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then prove it," I said coldly, stepping forward. He reached into the fire, his hand trembling. A scream tore from his throat as the coal burned his flesh, the acrid smell of charred skin filling the air. The crowd recoiled in horror, but I remained firm. "Confess," I demanded. The Sarpanch fell to his knees, cradling his blistered hand. "It wasn't me," he cried. "I only kept the secret. I didn't summon it." "Kept what secret?" I growled, grabbing him by the collar. "Bhishma, he didn't die in the fire," the Sarpanch admitted, tears streaming down his face. We buried him alive. He cursed us as the earth swallowed him." The revelation stunned the crowd into silence. Bhishma's curse was no longer a legend, it was a reckoning. His death, buried in betrayal, had created a festering wound that now bled malevolence. "Where is the grave?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. The Sarpanch pointed toward the banyan tree. "We buried him there," he whispered. "The roots keep him bound. The tree. The carvings. The Pishacha." It all made sense now. Bhishma's restless spirit had called the demon to exact vengeance. But why now, after all these years? Armed with spades and torches, I led a small group to the banyan tree. The villagers were reluctant, their feet dragging as though weighted by invisible chains. The night was silent, save for the rustling of leaves. We dug beneath the tree's sprawling roots, the soil damp and heavy with the smell of rot. After hours of labor, the spade struck something solid, a wooden box. It was a crude coffin, its edges splintered and warped. When we pried it open, we found only bones twisted unnaturally, as though the man within had clawed at his prison until his dying breath. The skull bore markings similar to those on Rajan's body, runes carved deep into the bone. As I examined the remains, a low growl rippled through the air. The villagers froze, their torches flickering. From the shadows, the Pishacha emerged, its form more monstrous than before. Its red eyes burned with fury, and its claws gleamed like obsidian. "You should not have disturbed him," it hissed. The Pishacha lunged, its claws slashing through the air. The villagers scattered, their screams echoing through the night. I stood my ground, raising my revolver and firing a silver bullet into its chest. The demon shrieked, its form flickering like a dying flame, but it didn't fall. The banyan tree's roots writhed, as if feeding on the chaos. I realized the truth, the tree itself was an anchor, a conduit for the curse. To banish the Pishacha, I would have to destroy it. "Mohan!" I shouted. "Bring the oil and salt." As Mohan and a few brave villagers poured oil over the tree, the Pishacha renewed its attack. It clawed through the crowd, its laughter a chilling symphony of pain and despair. I emptied my revolver into its form, each shot buying precious seconds. The villagers lit torches, throwing them onto the oil-soaked roots. Flames roared to life, consuming the tree in a fiery inferno. The Pishacha screamed, its body writhing as the runes on the tree burned away. Its form began to unravel, tendrils of shadow dissipating into the air. But even as it faded, it whispered, "This is not the end." The dawn broke over a village in ruins. The banyan tree was nothing but smoldering ash, and the Pishacha was gone. Yet, the scars it left were deep. The villagers buried Bhishma's remains with prayers, hoping to finally lay his spirit to rest. But I knew better. The Pishacha's final words were not idle threats. I spent the day tending to the wounded and gathering my belongings. The village was quieter than I had ever seen, its people humbled by the events of the night. But there was still an unease, a shadow that lingered. Before leaving, I uncovered an old journal hidden among Bhishma's belongings. Its final entry chilled me to the bone. When the Pishacha's hunger fades, another will rise in its place. For as long as men sin, the curse shall endure. I left the journal with Mohan, instructing him to guard it with his life. Knowledge is your greatest weapon, I told him. Use it wisely. As I walked away from Manihari, the sun casting long shadows across the landscape, I felt the weight of unfinished business. The Pishacha was gone, for now. But its echo lingered, a reminder that some evils can never be fully extinguished. And so, the journey continues. The road stretched endlessly before me, its dusty trail winding through fields that seemed to wither under the weight of the rising sun. The shadows of my past cases loomed as heavy as the satchel slung across my shoulder. It was a bag that carried not just tools and relics, but the burdens of truths uncovered in the darkest corners of the world. By mid-morning, I found myself at a lonely banyan tree standing defiantly amidst the flat plains. Its shade offered a momentary reprieve from the blistering sun. As I sat and reached into my bag for water, my hand brushed against something unfamiliar, something I had not packed. A chill rippled through me. Drawing the object from my bag, I found it to be a leather-bound book. Its cover was cracked and weathered, yet cold to the touch. The moment I held it, the faint scent of iron filled the air. I hadn't seen this book before, but the runes etched into its surface struck a sinister chord. They were the same symbols that had marked Rajan's body and Bhishma's coffin. I flipped open the cover, half expecting the pages to be blank. At first, they were, but a second later, black, glistening letters began to form as though written by an unseen hand. The ink shifted, glinting like oil under moonlight. The words that appeared on the page made my blood run cold. Elric Graves. Your fire is as futile as your faith. You think it is over, the letters continued, each word forming with deliberate malice, but you are merely a shadow chasing the sun. You have burned the tree, silenced the foolish. Yet, you cannot unmake what has been carved into the bones of your kind. The page turned on its own, revealing more. Sin is the anchor, and your world is drowning in it. Every village has a secret. Every man a sin. For as long as humanity breathes, I will rise. I slammed the book shut, my heart hammering. The air around me grew still, thick with an unplaceable dread. My fingers itched to hurl the cursed object into the dirt and leave it behind. Yet, something compelled me to hold on. Demons rarely delivered messages without purpose. They relished their games, each move designed to ensnare and control. If the Pishacha had sent me this, it wasn't a mistake. It was a challenge. I resumed my journey, the book weighing heavier with each step. Though I refused to open it again, its presence was a constant hum in the back of my mind. I tried to distract myself by thinking of the villagers I had left behind, their haunted eyes and broken voices. Manihari was free, for now. But the echoes of the curse were unmistakable. When I finally gave in and opened the book again, I found something new. The pages no longer bore words but images. A village aflame, its huts collapsing under a sky choked with smoke. Figures darting through the chaos, their eyes glowing red. And standing amidst the destruction, a towering silhouette with curling antlers, its mouth stretched into a blood-soaked grin. The Pishacha. As I stared, another line of text bled into existence. See your future, Elric Graves. See what your interference has unleashed. The next page turned on its own, revealing a map. It was crude yet unmistakable, a layout of another village. Its name was scrawled in red ink at the bottom, a caper. I stopped to rest at a roadside shrine, its deity carved from stone and smeared with faded vermilion. The presence of divinity gave me courage, or so I hoped, as I set the book on the ground. Lighting a small fire, I picked up a branch to stoke the flames higher. If this is a link to the demon, I'll destroy it, I muttered, feeding the fire with oil-soaked leaves. The flames licked hungrily at the book's edges, yet the leather remained unscorched. Instead, the runes began to glow, brighter than before, and words bled onto the page once more, searing into my mind like brands. You cannot destroy what lives within you. For you are part of the curse. Your sins, your failures, they are the seeds I will harvest. Sooner than you think, you will return to me. The fire extinguished itself with a hiss, leaving the book untouched. I stared at it, my breathing shallow. The Pishacha's voice, its taunts, were not mere threats. They were promises. I pressed on, refusing to stop again until I reached a town where the living outnumbered the dead. The thought of a caper gnawed at me. Was it already under siege? Or had the demon planted this image to draw me there? The book stirred in my bag, its presence like a whisper against my spine. This time, I opened it deliberately, determined to face whatever awaited. The final message was sprawled across the pages, its letters bold and jagged, as though carved by claws. You walk toward a path you cannot escape. For every light you extinguish, a darkness will rise. The Pishacha is not one, it is many. It is an idea. And you, Elric Graves, are the candle that keeps the night alive. Burn bright while you can, for the darkness will always return. As I closed the book, the weight of its words settled over me like a shroud. I could not ignore the warning. The Pishacha was not bound to Manihari alone. It was a force older than the villages it haunted, one that fed on humanity's unending flaws. The journey ahead would be long, and the battle far from over. But if I had learned anything from the horrors I had faced, it was this. To fight monsters, you must step willingly into the dark. The town of a caper loomed ahead, its silhouette etched against the dying light of dusk. My steps were slow, deliberate, as if each carried the weight of the cursed tome in my satchel. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, something faintly metallic, like the scent of old blood. Though the book had remained closed since its last chilling message, its presence still whispered in my mind. It pulsed faintly, a heart beating in rhythm with the dread clawing at the edges of my thoughts. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Not forever. In the dim glow of a flickering street lantern, I stopped to observe a caper. It seemed peaceful on the surface, children laughing, vendors calling out their wares, the clatter of rickety carts rolling over cobblestone streets. But peace was often the first thing to die when darkness crept in. From my vantage point, I noticed the smallest of tells, a shadow that moved too quickly, a man who crossed himself 3 times before stepping through his doorway, and the distant, eerie howl of something that was no mere jackal. The Pishacha was here. Or perhaps, something worse. That night, as I settled into a cramped room in the town's lone inn, the book stirred again. I resisted its pull for hours, trying to lose myself in the pages of a protective text I'd brought from Manihari. Yet the cursed tome called to me, its voice insistent, louder than my prayers. Finally, I opened it. The ink swirled chaotically before forming a single word on the first page, Elric. More letters followed, crawling like spiders across the parchment. They arranged themselves into sentences that twisted my stomach with their malice. Welcome to the next chapter. You think you fight against me, but you are part of the story. You are the light that casts the shadow. And as long as you live, so shall I. I slammed the book shut, but the words lingered in my mind. The demon was right, in a way. My work, my relentless pursuit of the unnatural, only drew me deeper into its world. And perhaps, it gave creatures like the Pishacha purpose, a reason to return, again and again. As I sat alone in that dim room, the town quiet outside and the book heavy in my lap, I considered my path. I could leave the book behind, let someone else face its horrors. I could even leave a caper and never look back. But then I remembered the villagers of Manihari, the Sarpanch, his haunted family, the boy who clung to me for hope. I thought of Rajan's mutilated body, of Bhishma clawing at his coffin in the dark. These were not memories I could erase, nor burdens I could cast aside. My fight wasn't over. It never would be. I extinguished the lamp, letting the darkness settle around me. My revolver sat on the nightstand, and the protective talisman burned faintly against my chest. As I closed my eyes, the faint sound of laughter drifted through the window, low and guttural, like a voice just beyond the veil. The Pishacha, or whatever demon waited in a caper, was calling. And I would answer.